G'day everyone, it's Matt here from Marker 66 Barbecue. We're back again for our next instalment of barbecue cooking today. Hopefully if you guys got a chance to see it, you enjoyed the rib video we did. If you didn't get a chance to see it, if you scroll back through the posts on the Inner Circle group, it'll be on there, or else you can check it out on our Facebook page. Alright, today we're going to switch it up a little bit and we're going to be cooking some beef. So we're briefly going to talk about the cut we're using, but today's video is largely around the method that we're using to cook it. So what we've got here is some tri-tip. So some of you may be familiar, but if you're not, tri-tip is from the rump. There's three main muscles in a rump, and the tri-tip is one of them. So named for its triangle shape. Maybe a slightly underrated cut, very tasty, and also pretty reasonably priced too. I bought these from Gilmore's. It was $40 plus GST, and I actually got 4 of these, so great cut to use cost-wise as well. Now the method we're going to use to cook these today is what's called a reverse sear. So some of you may be familiar with the idea that when you're cooking steak, or a piece of beef, that you get your hot plate as hot as you can, you chuck it on, you sear both sides, keep the juices in, and then from there you cook the steak. This is, as the name suggests, it's the other way round. So we're going to be cooking our cut first, and then we're going to sear it at the end. The reason we want to do that is because when we cook it first, we're cooking it at a slightly lower temperature, we're going to get a much more even cook. And also, you may have noticed when you sear your steak at the start, sometimes you get that grey or brown ring around the outside where you've seared it. So you've sort of got this thin layer of well done meat, and then it's still quite rare in the middle. When you're reverse searing, you find you don't get that as much. You get nice wall-to-wall pink colour of your meat. If you haven't tried reverse searing before, I'd recommend giving it a go. I think once you've done it, you probably won't go back. It's a really good method. Now we are using the tri-tip today, like I said, but this reverse searing method, you can cross that over really to any cut of red meat, I guess, whether it's just an individual steak, a whole cube roll, a standing rib roast. You can use it for lamb, a rack of lamb, or venison, or whatever you choose, right? So this method does cross over, but today we're using the tri-tip. Okay, so before we season our meat and get it onto the barbecue, we're just going to give it a quick trim up. You'll see here there's not an incredible amount of surface fat, but there is this little bit of silver skin here. So we want to take this off so that when we put our rub on, it's going to penetrate a little bit there. If we leave that on, then the rub's just going to sit on top of that. Best way to do that is get a very sharp knife. I find a boning knife is actually a really good knife to use for things like this because they're quite small and easy to handle. And then we sort of slide it under the skin there and start getting some of that off. It can be a bit fiddly, might take you a few minutes, but it's not too bad. Okay, so I've taken all that silver skin off now, and I've also removed any of the hard fat that was on the surface, because that's just not going to render down during the cook. So we want to cut that off as well. So the only thing left to do now before we put it on the barbecue is to apply our rub. I think with beef, I like to keep things pretty simple and use just what we call an SPG rub, or salt, pepper, garlic. Beef really has its own distinct flavour, and I don't want to put a rub on it that's going to overpower, dominate that. I want something that's going to complement it. You'll find a lot of beef rubs have a SPG base, and almost all rub manufacturers will have some form of beef rub that will have salt, pepper and garlic in it. The good thing about that too is if you don't have any at home, you can just use some salt and pepper. That works perfectly. I'm sure seasoning a steak with salt and pepper is not unfamiliar to anyone. So yeah, like I said, we like to keep it pretty simple with our beef rub. So what we're going to do now, And you'll see this one is quite granular, which I like on beef. I think I like that kind of texture of a little bit more granular in my rub. Some rubs are quite powdery, and that lends itself to some other proteins. With beef, I like to have something where you can really see those grains of salt and pepper. Now, if you watched our other video, you'll recall that I talked about not rubbing it too early. Generally no more than an hour before you're going to put it on, even a little bit less if you can, 35-45 minutes. Cool, so we've rubbed our beef now, we're going to let it sit, and while it's doing that we're going to go out and get the barbecue ready to go. Okay, so we've got our barbecue set up. Today we're cooking on the Weber kettle. And I've got this running about 250 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around 121 degrees Celsius. The fuel I'm using today is Kingsford Original, but you can use whatever charcoal you've got available. And you'll see I've got it set up for indirect grilling, so what that means is that I've got my heat source on one side and I'll be cooking on the other, so the protein is not directly above the heat. Okay, so I'm just going to chuck our beef on now. Okay, so now that we've got our beef on, it's really important that we monitor the temperature through this part. There's a couple of ways you can do that. You do get the little meat probes with the gauge on it. You can put in your meat. Alternatively, you can use something like this, which is an instant read digital thermometer. Or today I'm using this, so I have a probe in the meat that remotely runs out to this. And what I'm going to be aiming for is around 125 degrees Fahrenheit or 51 degrees Celsius. Okay, so I've just pulled the tri-caps off. They were up to about 125 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to rest them now for about 10 minutes. And while I do that, I'm going to get that kettle really ramped up for some very direct grilling. I should point out another thing that I missed before as well, is that today we're aiming for medium in terms of our doneness. So medium in Fahrenheit, you're looking at an internal temperature of 140 degrees, or in Celsius 60 degrees. You'll notice that I did pull them off at a little bit earlier at about 125. So as they rest here, this internal temperature is going to rise a little bit, and you'll find too that when we sear it, it might come up a little bit as well. So the idea is that when all is said and done and we chop it up, or slice it up rather, that you're sitting around 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 degrees Celsius. Okay, so we've got this barbecue really fired up now. We've got these coals straight onto the grate, and I guess this is the fun part of the reverse sear, when we throw our meat on here. And it does pay to have a long set of tongs if you got them. We'll get them straight over those coals and sear away. Cool, so just taking these off the barbecue now, and you can see they've got a nice little bit of char on the outside. So let's slice it up and see how it looks.
Just get off the toilet.
Look at that, nice, beautiful, juicy pink meat. It looks really good. So I think with tri-tip, it's good to slice these quite thin. Let's give that a try. It's really good. You get a couple of good contrasts going on. You get that nice taste of the beef, and then the zing of the salt and pepper. But also there's a textural contrast as well. The nice tenderness of the beef and a bit of char on the outside. It's very nice. I do recommend. Okay, so look at that, cool, very tender and beautiful. I better give some to the camera woman. Okay, so that's the reverse sear. Now, like I said earlier, you can cross this over to all sorts of different cuts. You could do it just as an individual steak if you had a cube roll or a standing rib roast, lamb rex, whatever your preference is. And in terms of doneness, again, that's just your preference. Google will tell you what all the internal temperatures are for beef, and it'll always be the same. Obviously, larger cuts are going to take a bit longer to get up to temperature, smaller cuts not quite as long, but the principle remains the same. So hopefully you guys learned something today. Thanks again to Andy and Mel for giving us the opportunity to do this. We're really enjoying it. It's good fun. And we'll see you next time.